So just a couple of administrative matters for the working groups. First, again, a reminder that under the open meeting law, the working groups need to take minutes of their meetings. The meetings need to reflect the members in attendance. A question came up. The minutes do not need to reflect who's, by name, who's, let me put it this way. Comments do not have to have an attribution to a person in the minutes. So the minutes don't have to say Kurt Schwartz said and then Joe Coughlin said. They can just capture the topics. However, formal votes need to be recorded by name. So just as a reminder, the minutes become part of the public record. So for the working groups, I ask that you create minutes, approve the minutes amongst the working group, and then when you have approved minutes, if you will forward them to Sean and to me, I will take care of posting them to the website. The other administrative matter for the working groups is as you set your next or in subsequent meetings, you need to draft a brief agenda for your meetings and send the agenda and the date and time of the meeting to Sean and me. Sean will arrange for the room here in the school, and I will formally post the notice of the working group. So just make sure, preferably 2 weeks in advance, that Sean and I get an agenda, which does not have to be very detailed. Date and time. And there was one other issue that came up in terms of frequency of meetings. A reminder that we all voted to not set a mandatory meetings schedule or mandatory number of meetings per year. We left it to the discretion of each working group. Sean and I spoke earlier this week. Our suggestion to the working groups is that in this calendar year, each working group meet at least twice, but we leave it to the working groups to do more. I just remind people this is more of a marathon than a sprint, so I saw one working group thinking about monthly meetings. If you want to do monthly meetings, that's great, but just remember, we're in this for somewhat of a long haul, so don't burn yourselves out, but I leave it to you all to figure out what works. But Sean and I do suggest an initial meeting and at least one more meeting in this calendar year. And a reminder that the most important topic for the initial meeting of the working groups is to define the objectives of your working group, the scope of your discussions for the working group. But any questions, issues on the working groups before we move on?
We had one question come up. If other panel members would like to join the working groups, does that panel member who is not listed as a member of the working group get to vote on matters that are brought up by the working group? So can somebody sit in for a meeting and be considered as part of that working group?
Unless anybody wants to discuss, let's go with the answer no.
That's what we went
The
with.
working groups have formal membership. If a panel member would like to formally join a working group, just let Sean and me know. We can do that very simply, but we shouldn't have members floating in and out and casting a vote, and then if they're not regular members. So does that work for everybody? Joe?
I know there's been a number of changes to the list we've got at the last meeting of those who had signed up for the 5 different working groups. Would it be possible to get a current list of those members so we all are aware of what the current status of the membership of each of the working groups are?
I will make sure we circulate. Sean is on vacation, but emailing me only 5 times a day, so I can get that from him. Absolutely. Any other working group questions, issues? Then, without further ado, let's turn to the focus of this evening's discussion and our formal presentation and discussion. So it's really my pleasure to welcome the NRC to this evening's meeting, and in particular Bruce Watson, who, if I have your title right, Chief of the Reactor Decommission Branch. Right. Bruce has a presentation and then is here and will stay for, after the presentation, we have plenty of time on the agenda for discussion amongst members before we then open it up for questions, discussion from the public. And so why don't we proceed, and Bruce, I'll let you introduce your team that you have here as well.
Okay.
And that clicker hopefully will advance your slides.
Well, first, let me thank you for inviting me and the panel. Appreciate everybody taking time out to come out this evening and at least listen, I hope. With me, I have Diane Strincy. She's with our Office of Public Affairs. And John Greaves is up there. He's with our state liaison officers. I had it planned on Ted Smith coming with me, but unfortunately, he had a death in the family and is unable to attend. So with that, I'll go ahead and begin. I'm here to give you an overview of reactor decommissioning. And over the last, I'll say, 10 years or so, it's been pretty much a very busy part of the NRC's work. So let's go ahead and switch way.
Try that one at the point.
How about up here?
We just need to try that now. There we go.
Okay, let's get started then. Okay. I want to remind everybody principally what the NRC's mission is. Our mission is nuclear and radiation safety. And we do this throughout the plant operating time. We do it when the plant shuts down and transitions from operations and decommissioning. We are there during the entire decommissioning, and we are there inspecting the plant, ensuring that the plant is radiologically decommissioned until the license is terminated. So once the license is terminated, we no longer have a say in what goes on at the plant, whether it's actually not a plant anymore, but I'll say the site. So I just want to be clear, that's what the Congress gave us the mandate to do. We're required to regulate the nuclear material and, of course, the radiation that was at the plant. Now, when this plant is going to be shut down, Pilgrim, like the other plant in Massachusetts, there will be another licensed facility which will hold the dry fuel storage facility. So the NRC will be continuing to inspect that facility also until a permanent repository is found and the fuel is removed from the site. So, as far as decommissioning goes, we have 6 plants that are in active decommissioning. I'm expecting that 4 of those will complete decommissioning by 2020. So that will leave us with 2 plants in active decommissioning that we'll be providing oversight to. 8 plants have announced that they are shutting down, and there may be more. Some of those may come off the list and stay operating. It all depends on the economic factors in which they're working with. However, Pilgrim is included in those 8 that have announced they're shutting down. I'm going to talk about this list of topics, our experience, what happens in the decommissioning process, topics that we hear from the public that are general interest, and of course I'll talk specifically about a few decommissioning projects in Massachusetts, and I hope to summarize our remarks. Oops, wrong way. Got it to work now. I flunked this part of it, I guess. Our current regulations went into effect in 1997. They're what we call performance-based, which allow a lot of flexibility for the licensee, and they're risk-informed. In other words, they're dose-based. So when we release them a site from the license, it is based on a radiation level. We have extensive decommissioning experience regulating these nuclear facilities, and since 1997, we've done over 70 of these sites. All of them have been released for unrestricted use. In other words, the landowner, at this point, enters the landowner, so they will decide what they're going to do with the property, if they still own it, when they complete the decommissioning. So, with that, though, we have 10 power plants that have completed decommissioning, and they've all had their licenses terminated for unrestricted use. Gotta be a spot for this. There it is. The regulations are in the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 50.82. If you want a reference for those, but there's a regulatory guide that's available on our website, Reg Guide 1.184, which you can look up and which describes the process in a little more detail. The first step in the decommissioning process is that the utility or licensee will notify us of the intent to permanently shut down, which has been done for Pilgrim already, right? They intend to shut down. They will submit to us 2 certifications. One of those is that once they permanently shut down the plant, and the second one is when the fuel is permanently removed from the reactor. Once the fuel is permanently removed from the reactor, and we receive that certification, they are no longer authorized to operate the plant or put the fuel back in the reactor. So it has to stay in the spent fuel pool. The next thing that they have to do is submit to us a post-shutdown decommissioning activities report. And it's called a report because that's what it is. It is a plan of their decommissioning activities, and we'll go into detail a little bit more about this in the next slide or so. But when we receive the PSDAR, as we call it, we hold a public meeting to get comments on it. One of the key features of the regulation, as I said, performance-based, is that the decommissioning must be completed within 60 years after that permanent cessation of operations. Now, that doesn't mean it takes 60 years to decommission the plant. The 10 power plants that have been decommissioned thus far have taken between 7 and 10 years. It's really on their schedule, how fast they want to do it. So there's 50 years that you're allowed to let the plant to go through radioactive decay, which will reduce the radiation dose rates in the plant during that 60 years. The next big step in the process is that once they've, they wanted to submit to us a license termination plan. And this has to be 2 years after, once they do, well, excuse me, I'm not having a good time here. I'm just speaking all over myself here. What I'm saying, the next step in the big regulatory process is that they will submit to us a license termination plan. That plan has to be submitted to us within 2 years before they're going to request license termination. So the time period between the PSDAR and when the LTP is submitted, they will be decommissioning the plant, and they will continue to do that under the current safety evaluation process we use that they operate under during the operating of the plant. So nothing really changes in that standpoint. I will say that the LTP is their plan to demonstrate to us that they will meet their unrestricted radiological release criteria for terminating the license. So it's a fairly technical document. It's got a number of computer modeling that's done with it to come up with the actual residual radioactivity levels that will allow the plant to have the license termination. Once they demonstrate to us that the license is ready for termination, they'll submit to us final status survey reports, and once we conclude that we agree with those reports, we will terminate the license by letter. One of the key features of our process, though, is we will be there inspecting the plant all the way to license termination. We also use an independent contractor. Right now, our contractor is Oak Ridge Associated Universities, which will do independent surveys to verify that the licensee is doing the correct measurements to demonstrate that they're going to meet the license criteria. So it's just not the NRC validating their residual radioactivity levels. I'll just talk a little bit about the decommissioning process. Like I said, we call this phase 1. The reactor is permanently shut down, and the fuel is transferred to the spent fuel pool. The plant is prepared for decommissioning. By that, they may do a number of modifications to the plant to facilitate the decommissioning. One of the things they generally do will include a independent spent fuel pool cooling system so that the existing one can be removed. They may also do some security changes because now the security requirements are to protect the fuel, not necessarily the whole plant because the plant's no longer operating. So there's a number of modifications that will be done to the plant typically in the first year or two. The killer. Yeah. Hoping I would find a sweet spot. All right, that's good. It seems to work. We look at the continuation of phase one. During that first, prior to shutting down or within 2 years after they shut down, the licensee has to submit to us the post-shutdown decommissioning activities report. Basically, it's going to provide us with the decommissioning strategy they plan to follow. We refer to that as decon or safe store. Decon means you're going to be in active decommissioning. Safe store means you're going to go into a kind of a mothballed state and decommission it sometime later. But they do have 60 years to complete that decommissioning. Some plants will go back and forth between active decommissioning and safe store. So they will, when they have extra resources, they'll decommission parts of the plant, and then they'll go back into a safe store to let the money grow again. It's all up to them on how they want to manage the decommissioning. In this report, it'll also provide us a site decommissioning funding status, and is consistent with their schedule they will have to submit to us for the decommissioning. They will also review the current environmental assessment for the plant, and they have to conclude that they're going to stay within the existing environmental envelope, as we call it, or assessment, environmental impact statement, or environmental assessment to decommission the plant. If they can't, then they have to identify that and do the environmental analysis that would be outside that area. So there would be an additional environmental work if they needed to do that. We will hold a public meeting to obtain comments. One of the key features of this, as I said before, it's a report. It is not a license amendment or an exemption from regulation. It is merely a report that outlines to us and the public what their plans are for the decommissioning. One of the purposes of the PSDAR is not only let the public know what the plans are, but it allows the NRC to align our resources so we know what inspection activities we will need to schedule and have ready to support the decommissioning to make sure it's done safely. Phase two of the decommissioning, they actually do the decommissioning. There may be some intermediate, which is typically immediate dismantling when we go into decon. San Onofre is pretty much doing that. They've been shut down for a couple of years now. They're actually been shut down a little longer than that, but since they declared they were decommissioning, they've been actively making changes to the plant to facilitate the decommissioning. Some plants will go directly into safe store, which means they're going to wait a while before they're going to begin decommissioning. And that's typically done at a lot of the multi-site plants. Like I said, they have 60 years to complete the decommissioning. Typically, 50 years of that will result in significant radioactive decay and significant dose savings to the workers who are going to do the decommissioning. And then we base that 60 years on it. They'll take 10 years to dismantle the plant and terminate the license. And then phase three is the license termination plan, which is approved by license amendment. And we will also hold a public meeting at that time when the license termination plan is submitted. Our inspection program, as I said, continues until the license is terminated. We have a dedicated inspection manual, 2561, which is available on our website. We're currently going to be issuing a revision to that based on some of the more recent experience we've had with the decommissioning of these reactors. There's about 40 inspection procedures. There's also a whole litany of procedures which we can use from the operating area, specifically in the security area and in environmental area. We may keep there is a minimum of at least one inspection per year, And that's based on the activities that go on at the plant. So if a plant's in a safe store situation and there's no work going on other than routine surveillances, which are pretty minimal during the safe store period, then we'll only be there once a year. But if there's any activities at all going on, we may be there quarterly, we may be there monthly. It all depends on what the activities are at the site. The resident inspector, currently the operating plants have resident inspectors. At least one of the resident inspectors will generally stay up to 6 months to a year after the shutdown. And that's so that the plant is observed and inspected to make sure, provided with the proper oversight, that the plant transitions from operation into decommissioning, and to have a person that's familiar with the plant. But this can be extended if we need to. We think we kept the resident at San Onofre for a little over a year there for various reasons, but one of them was the amount of activities they had going on. The other thing I want to mention is that inspection reports are publicly available unless they deal with specific security or safeguards issues. You're not going to see that, but all our inspection reports are publicly available, so that you'll be able to get them off our ADAM system. Thought I'd just go through a few things with you from our experience. This is Rancho Seco. This is what the plant looked like in 2009 when we terminated the license. It looks like this today. The license has been terminated with the exception of the spent fuel facility down on the right, and that's under a separate license. And the reason I'm bringing this point up is that all the radioactivity has been removed from the site. The reactor building's been emptied and decontaminated, all the radioactive components have been removed, and so we terminated the license because it met the license termination criteria for unrestricted use. It is up to the owner and whatever the state requires for site restoration. So in this case, the utility, which is a municipal district, Sacramento Municipal Utility District, has decided that they're not going to spend the money right now to demo the buildings and knock them down. But this is in California, and it's up to the owner and the state to decide what they want the end state of the decommissioning to be. It's not the NRC's. Once all the radioactivity is removed, we have no say in it.
Could you explain to the panel what unrestricted release means?
Yes, it's unrestricted release means that it can be used for whatever purpose the owner wants to use it for. There are no restrictions.
And you said there was no radioactive material left at Rancho Seco?
It met our criteria for unrestricted release, which is less than 25 millirem per year.
So there is radioactive material remaining at the site?
There's residual radioactivity, but it's not, I don't want to say, it's not really, it's really close to background. Typically, these plants are, the limit is 25 millirem per year plus a LARA. And the 10 plants that have been decommissioned so far have been decommissioned for a small fraction at only a few millirem per year. So in practicing the LARA principle, they really clean these sites up pretty well. So by unrestricted release means you could use them for any purpose you want, whether it's commercial, industrial, you could have a school built on them. It's not the NRC's decision what happens with them.
How does that sync up with the long-term storage of the nuclear material?
It's there, it's under its own footprint on the property, but obviously not all the property is licensed at this point. Okay, so I can't get into how big the ISTAC sites are, but most of them try to make it as small as they can because they don't want to pay property taxes on it. In this case, it's tax-free anyway because it's owned by the city. Oops, wrong way again. This is Big Rock Point. The license was terminated in 2007. And the reason I'm bringing this slide up is that the Big Rock was important to the Native Americans. And we have a group of people that will communicate and interface with any Native American tribes you have in the area. I don't really know of any, but if we do have some that have an interest in the decommissioning, we will be happy to talk with the leaders of the tribes. As you can see here, Big Rock Point, it was named after that because of the Big Rock. It's on the north shore of Lake Michigan, and it told the Native Americans which way to canoe. go from summer to winter, which way they would go during the different seasons. In the summer, they would go to Canada, so they made a right at the Big Rock. And in the winter, when they came south, they would make a left at the Big Rock, which would bring them into Traverse Bay, which is kind of a protected area to winter over in. So that's the significance of the Big Rock. And you can see here, the licensee chose to greenfield the site. And so you can see the vegetation is back to the natural lake shore of Lake Michigan on the right. This is Maine Yankee, right up the road here in Wiscasset. That's the site on the left. The state of Maine required them to greenfield the site. In 2005, we terminated the license. That picture on the right, I actually took. And so the site was all decommissioned. Virtually most of the underground structures were all gone, and it was greenfielded. I think the utility turned most of the land over to a nonprofit and made it into a park. The reason I bring this up is that the state of Maine put additional restrictions, or requirements, I should say, on the utility for the decommissioning. And one of those was instead of 25 milliroom, they required them to decommission down to 10 milliroom per year. And what this did, though, was just cause them to ship probably more soil and other materials out, which they probably wouldn't have probably done if they hadn't had this more restrictive limit. So it costs more to meet that criteria. And but in the end, though, it was decommissioned for a few milliroom, just like the rest of them. So the state can put additional restrictions on the decommissioning. Okay, I think there were some on Yankee Row, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. This is Connecticut Yankee. The reason I bring this one up is that Connecticut Yankee had some significant number of underground pipes that contain radioactive material, and this is the only site that we've had that had significant groundwater contamination. They removed a tremendous amount of soil from the site, a few million cubic feet of soil, and went down to bedrock in all the areas as a requirement of the state of Connecticut. Connecticut required them to continue to monitor the groundwater for an additional 10 years after we terminated the license. After 7 years, the state told the utility they didn't have to monitor the groundwater anymore because there was no more radioactivity in the groundwater. So it's the only one that we've had that did have significant groundwater contamination. The fix for it was to remove the source of the contamination going into the groundwater. And so it wasn't that the groundwater had to be remediated in any way. Some of the topics we hear at public meetings are, of course, the economic losses to the local community. A lot of revenues are generated for the local community. The desire to have a community involvement, formation of advisory groups. Just so you know, it's not the NRC's there's no NRC requirement to have an advisory group unless the site is going to be, license is going to be terminated for restricted release, which means it's really out into perpetuity. So we want the community involved with that. When the sites are going to be decommissioned for unrestricted release, we have no requirement for that. We do encourage that. We think it's a good practice by the industry to sponsor those or to have the state create their own, which has been done here. There's a lot of concerns about the future use of the site because basically the landowner or the licensee becomes the landowner because they already own the land, and it's up to them and the state how the site is reused. The NRC has no say in what the reuse of the property is after we terminate the license. One of the key issues, of course, is the spent fuel storage facilities that are left on site. People are concerned about the time that they will be in storage, and of course, the transportation of those spent fuel when it is time to remove that into the permanent repository. Like I said, we'll be there to inspect these casks in facilities till they're done. I would, my only encouragement is that for anybody is to speak to your national policymakers on this issue to get this issue resolved. So that's my only real comment on this, is other than we're stuck with it, we're stuck inspecting it, and so it's going to be there until it's resolved. Reactor decommissioning, one of the big complaints is that, we allow 60 years for it to be completed, and but that was the wisdom of the NRC commissioners at the time, back in the early 1990s, that made that decision. So it is one of those rules that's based on, at the time, there weren't always burial sites to send the radioactive waste. It does allow for some safety significant improvements with the dose rates reduction. It allows for the decommissioning funds to grow, and it allows you to do it with still having people that know somewhat about the plant in order to have the technical knowledge to disassemble it. One of the big complaints is reduction in emergency plans. After the fuel is cooled down, after about a year and a half of being out of the reactor, it's not possible to have an off-site dose release that would cause a protective action guide to be met that are required by the EPA. So there is significant reductions in the emergency response plans to basically an on-site response requirement. One of the other items is the decommissioning fund adequacy. We do have a group that looks at that fund every few years when the plant's operating, and we look at that fund each year when the plant is in decommissioning, because our responsibility is to ensure they have a reasonable amount of money, a reasonable amount of funding to complete the decommissioning. And that's in our regulations. Most recently, we've had a number of decommissioning license transfers. The licenses at Zion and La Crosse were transferred to private entities to facilitate decommissioning the site. We're currently reviewing one license transfer request for Vermont Yankee, and what's unusual about this, it includes the sale of the land and the property and the plant to a private entity. So we're in the process of doing that review right now, so I really can't go into any details under that, but that's what the application is for. In Massachusetts, Yankee Row was decommissioned, and we terminated the license in 2007. The one thing I like about this picture is that the plant was there and operated and is gone. But on your right, the picture on your right is a hydroelectric dam that's been there for probably, I think, 100 years. I think it's still operational. So here's the nuclear plant's been there, been decommissioned and gone, and it's returned the way it was before the plant was built. The only exception, I will be honest with you, is that there is a dry fuel storage facility back up on the hill there, since there's no repository for it to go to. So, so we do have reactor decommissioning experience as a regulator in the state of Massachusetts. This is Worcester Polytechnic Institute. The research reactor was decommissioned, and the license was terminated in 2013. Those are pictures of part of the reactor core after the fuel was removed. And that's all gone and disassembled and disposed of as radioactive waste, and the license was terminated. In summary, I just want to remind everybody that we are going to be there till the license terminated. We will continue to inspect the plant. We will continue to license the facility. There will be a number of licensing changes as the plant transitions from operations to decommissioning. And then once the fuel's removed into dry storage, there's a number of licensing activities that go associated with that. And these licensing actions are designed to make sure that the plant remains safe. We will continue to inspect the plant or the site and the dry fuel storage as long as it's there. So we don't go away. And right now, like I said, we have 6 plants in active decommissioning. We're expecting that 4 of those will be completed by 2020. There's plants in safe store. A number of those are at various stages of decommissioning. We have a few of them that like to decommission and do about a year's work, and then they stop and let the fund regrow, and then they do some more work, but it's up to them what they do. We are expecting that there may be more shutdowns. We hear all the time about plants needing rate relief in order to keep operating. I know in New York, they did some rate relief and tax relief to allow some of the plants in the northern part of the state to continue to operate. Illinois did some changes so that 3 of the plants there in Illinois can continue to operate. And we hear all the time about plants in various states needing rate relief. I think 3 Mile Island Unit 1 is now announced they're shutting down unless they get rate relief in the next year. So it's kind of a volatile situation. I don't say volatile, but very changeable situation with decommissioning. But we're prepared to handle all the decommissionings as plants shut down within the NRC. We'll see what happens with the future. But it's really up to the states, since they regulate the commerce in their states, the collection of the decommissioning funds, and the rate of return, or the amount of money these plants can make by operating and producing electricity. So we're just an independent safety regulator again, and we just make sure the plants are operated and decommissioned safely until the license is terminated. And with that, we can talk.
Well, thank you. So let's open this up. We have plenty of time. We finished earlier, so this is a time for discussion, question and answers. So why don't we just work our way once around and then open it up? Joe?
Thanks, Bruce, for presentation. 2 questions. One, even though the NRC doesn't approve the PSDARs, I'm assuming from other things that we've seen on other decommissioned facilities that you certainly do reserve the right to comment on them if you believe that parts of them don't meet your requirements. Is that a correct assumption? And the second question is, you mentioned that you require that the licensee retain, quote, reasonable funds within the decommissioning fund. Can you elaborate a little more on how you define reasonable?
Okay. The first question you had was on the PSDAR. There is a regulatory guide 1.185, I think it's listed in my slides, where you can find out what we expect the content level of detail to be in that report. If the licensee doesn't provide us that information, then we'll go back and ask them for the information. We currently have one plant out in the Midwest, which we don't think they did an adequate review of the environmental situation at the plant, and so we have additional requests of them to come back with more information on the environmental assessments. So, yes, we have the right, and we'll make sure it meets our content requirements so that the public is fully informed on the decommissioning. Reasonable decommissioning funds. We have a formula in the regulations which says it's the minimum amount, okay, that has to be put in a trust fund that the licensee can't use until they get into decommissioning. So it's typically run, those trust funds are managed by a bank, and so they have a trustee who oversees those funds and oversees the growth of those funds, and then will not allow those to go out until they, the decommissioning actually starts in earnest at the plant. So we have this minimum fund based on the size of the plant. 5 years before they plan to shut down, they're supposed to submit to us a site-specific estimate and identify any shortfalls in the decommissioning fund as it relates to the actual cost estimate that they're going to provide to us. So if there are shortcomings in the fund, then the licensee typically is required to fulfill those requirements. Now, what's got to be made clear here is that the fund is intended to grow, and so if they're not going to decommission in, say, for 20 years, then they have 20 years to gain interest on that to show that they're going to have adequate funding. Now, the NRC's funding is based on radiological decommissioning. So I was talking about Rancho Seco, site restoration is not included in those funds unless the state requires them to have a fund for site restoration. So that fund that we look at, is it reasonable, is the amount of money we believe it is estimated to decommission the plant from a radiological standpoint. In other words, remove the radioactive materials from the site. And then, like I said, once the plant goes into decommissioning, they're required each year by the end of March to report the status of the fund to us, so we keep tabs on the fact that they have adequate funds in order to meet the plan that they submitted to us before.
Rich Grassi, Mr. Watson. I'm curious, understanding the purpose of the PSDAR, there's a cost estimate that goes along with the PSDAR. And I'm not going to reference North Star, but it's of interest to me because North Star did a PSDAR and also did a cost estimate, but at Vermont, I think they were talking about a special sauce that they had in their PSDAR, so they wouldn't release the actual details of the estimate. My question is this: I'm really curious if this is a construction project, and it is. The way I've conducted construction projects is there are either milestones where you collect the money or a firm fixed price for certain phases. I'm curious as to how the money in the trust fund is allocated to the licensee, whether it be Entergy or North Star, and how that money, you said there's a trustee, and it's done by a bank. Is the relationship between the trust fund direct to the licensee?
Yes, it is.
And it is?
Yes.
And what role does the person on site, which you said in San Onofre was only there an extra year or so, what role does the NRC have in terms of verifying that in fact the decommissioning has been accomplished in accordance with the PSDAR promise?
Okay. Like I said, we do inspect the plant. We know how much progress is being made. And so we know that there is progress being made either through engineering work or actual dismantling activities, which cost money. So, but then they're required to report to us how much money they've spent, how much interest has been gained on that decommissioning fund each year. So we keep tabs on it from that standpoint, plus we inspect the plant. To
Do you
make
have a
sure.
veto in terms of whether or not the licensee is paid a certain amount of money based on work completed?
No, that's between them and the trustee. We just make sure that that minimum amount of money that's left
Yeah.
in the fund each year can still cover the cost estimate to do the
Right.
decommissioning.
I don't want to take up much more time, but Kurt, if I could
Well,
just.
let me
one more
just, we have a site out in the Midwest. I don't want to go into details because it's been with DOJ now for Department of Justice over some litigation over it. And one of the issues we have is there seems to be a lot of money, quote, being spent, but no work getting done. And so we can take them to task over that, any one of them. We have currently one material site, I'll just say, that we have taken issue with and actually got the Department of Justice involved to go after the licensee to get some work done. I'll say it that way.
So, assuming, let's say, I mean, the licensee right now has said they're going into safe store for Plymouth. We haven't seen the PSDAR yet, so we don't know for sure. So let's say that goes to potentially North Star. I'm not,
Right.
and North Star has a significantly less cost estimate of what the decommissioning will take. Do you get involved in, let's say you're on decon, do you get involved in the decision-making to go back into safe store to accumulate the trust funds? And does that, like the PSDAR, does that go before you for comment?
Right now, just so everybody knows, we have a request, an application to transfer the license of Vermont Yankee to an entity called North Star, which is a company, private company. We are reviewing not only the technical qualifications, but the financial qualifications of North Star. Within that submittal, they've submitted a post-shutdown decommissioning activities report should they be granted the license transfer, okay? So we're not looking at their PSDAR yet. we got to approve them for the license first. So once or if we do approve the license, because we're still reviewing, and I can't pass any judgment since it's under review right now. If we do approve the license transfer, then the next thing on our plate is to review the PSDER and take an assessment of the site costs that they've given us and how much money's in the decommissioning fund and whether we believe they have reasonable amount of money to cover those costs. So it's the next step in that process. I also want to point out that the utilities put this money in an independent trust, the money, and there's many restrictions on that. It's fairly conservative requirements for investing. It's actually, we base the estimates, I believe, on a 2% return. I'm not the financial person, but, which is very conservative. And so we also have the right to go audit those trustees and funds to make sure what the licensees told us is there.
Well, one final question, very quickly. I'm familiar with Vermont Yankee when they tried to have the property tax of Vernon paid for by the have the licensee take it out of the decommissioning trust fund. And it's my understanding that was approved by NRC.
I really don't know the details on that one. I'm sorry. Boy, I can get back to you on that. There was a lot of contention on what could be used for decommissioning funds.
Exactly.
and-
I mean, the regulations and rules and guidelines are pretty clear what the money can be used
Yeah.
for, and FSI is not included in
Right.
that. As, you know, like you say.
There's certain what I call hotel costs. Every month you have you have costs that go on, that you have to pay for. You have to pay for the power, for electricity. You have security you got to pay for. There's certain recurring costs that you have each
Where
month.
do I sign up? I mean, it's a good deal.
So, yeah, I just don't remember which one was.
Thank
in
you very
which.
much, Mr. Watson.
Thank you.
Yeah, I do. Thanks. I guess I'll just pick up on that thread before I ask further, but aren't you allowing the decommissioning trust funds to be used for, transferring from the spent fuel
Right.
pool to the dry cask stores?
That's a normal operation, though. It's required to
But are you
start the
al-
decommissioning.
But you're allowing that from the trust fund?
No, I don't think so. I think that's the normal operating fund for when the plant shuts down. They're still in their normal operating condition. They really can't tap into the decommissioning funds until they produce, I guess it's the PSDER.
Okay,
Okay.
that helps. So there's
Yeah.
a separate operating fund that they
Right,
would
they
be
have an
using for
operating
that?
fund for the-
And
for the plant during
And
it
the
while it's
decommissioning,
on.
wait, Rich?
No, I think the issue is, yes, but I think the issue is if they take it out of the trust fund, they eventually have to sue the government to get the money back, and the money that comes back goes directly into the trust fund. No? That's what I was
Okay.
told.
So I would like, and I'll take it in writing
Well, I didn't bring my
sometime.
financial guy with me.
I'll
You guys
take it-
probably
I'll
have
take
met
it in
Mike
writing to the
Kuzinski
panel
before.
sometime, Kurt, maybe, that we can get some absolute clarity about that, because I know that we have different understandings
Yeah, there's
about that,
certain-
and it would help us to have the right understanding.
I believe the regulation, and don't quote me, but they're allowed to draw 3% of the decommissioning funds for planning purposes in the beginning. They're not allowed to do any major decommissioning until
Once
after
they give
su-
you their PSDAR.
PSDAR, right.
All
By
right.
then-
So I'm not, yeah,
Yeah, I'm just saying,
I don't have a difficulty with that. I just want to understand the spent fuel part of it and the
Mm-hmm.
dry cask part of it. And you said also in your presentation that once the license is terminated, the operating license is terminated, and the spent fuel is removed from the pool into dry cask, you give them a different license?
Right.
And what is that license, and why is it you and not DOE?
Because the NRC regulates the storage of that fuel until it's.
Until it's
DOE
buried, until it's-
until DOE takes title to it,
And why aren't
It
they
is-
taking title to it?
because they don't
When
have a
it's-
place to store it.
Well, they're storing it on site and all these other places you
Yeah,
just
I
pointed
understand,
out.
but they're still under an NRC license. That's beyond my control.
So that's, and when did that rule come into effect?
And it's been there for, I don't really know, but Part 72 has been
Okay,
out there for a
okay,
long
okay,
time.
All right. And then I had one other, I think, question, and it was, it really goes to, you know, how do you distinguish, you know, the radiological cleanup from the other cleanup? So you've got, for instance, at Entergy, there's some, you know, higher than Class C waste stored next to the water over there. And there's, you know, buildings that handle that I assume have some radiological content in them. And there's the turbine building and the other thing. What can't they spend the decommissioning trust fund on?
They can't spend it on the management of spent nuclear fuel.
And they can't spend it on taking down the parking lot if there's no rads there.
I won't go into that detail because there's certain things you would do, in my opinion, and this is my opinion, you do to make the decommissioning more efficient. And if that means you spend a little bit to modify the plant to get it ready for decommissioning, then you would do those things if it saves money in the long run.
Well,
I would look
if-
for the utility to make that kind of
Okay, so if
justification.
I read the regulations closely enough, will I understand that?
Probably not.
So
try-
how can
no,
I?
we're trying to
well,
clarify
well,
some of
in the
this.
process, so I'm just interested about this. I'm not
Yeah.
interested in the rest of the country, although it was very interesting, your slides.
Well, they're good examples for
Yeah,
what may
no,
happen here
they're
in the
great
future.
examples,
But I
but
can't,
I didn't see any of them on Cape Cod Bay, you know, so. I'm a little concerned about where the spent fuel is there, and I'm concerned about how you know, how it's gonna be stored there.
there-
I liked that Maine Yankee had it on the hill. I'm all for that, and Entergy knows that, right? So I'm trying to get it on the hill. So is there a way for us to work with the NRC to evaluate the risk to the public of leaving it where it is, or does my Board of Health, my Department of Public Health have to take that on as a heavy lift?
well, I guess this is federal jurisdiction. We regulate the nuclear waste, including the spent fuel, until it's titled to DOE. So as long as they're complying with our regulations, anything that goes outside of that, whether it's moving the fuel to a different facility, is really up to the owner to make application to do that. And so it's really their choice what they want to do.
So in terms
And then
of
we
the
would make
public-
sure it's safe to be done, to be transferred to a different police.
Yeah, I'm not worried about you thinking it's gonna be safe to be transferred. I'm wondering about it being safe to stay there. So what I wanna know is when the NRC is gonna get around to evaluating changed environmental conditions so that they actually address the concerns that we've expressed for the last several years here.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just leave it at that, Kurt.
And let me point out, we have responded to numerous letters of yours on that concern.
Yeah, but you still haven't given me the answer on all the maps because they went to somebody that's smarter, and I haven't heard back from them in a year and a half or
Okay,
2 years.
well.
So it's about time.
And on this side, questions, go down, yes.
I feel like I've been neglecting this side of the room.
It's all right, Bruce. John Mahoney, Town of Plymouth. So, that slide up there, Bruce, and I'm looking at slide 4 right now. So you said that a total of 10 power reactor sites have completed decommissioning, had the reactor license terminated and released for unrestricted use. And then, oh, you didn't have to change that. But anyways, then that last one that was up there had the 6 currently going through the process. And
Right,
then
it's the same first slide.
10 or 12 in the, so, out of those 3 categories, and especially, how much of a factor is the sufficient revenue in that decommissioning fund played in all 3 of those categories? And is that the single driving force as to whether or not, you know, the utility decided to go into?
Well, keep in mind, the utilities only did the 10 power reactors. The 70-some that are on that slide with all the bar chart,
Yeah.
most of those are private companies. And they have requirements for a decommissioning fund, which also includes a 25% contingency in that decommissioning fund to ensure they didn't underestimate the amount of money that's required. Now, I can tell you that, as I mentioned before, one of those material sites is currently, I guess I don't know the proper legal term, but they're negotiating or have been directed by the Department of Justice to make certain financial changes because they've been, quote, spending money, but no work's been getting done. And so that's part of that side. We do have a number of older sites that declared bankruptcy because the company died or went out of business before the decommissioning was completed. And so,
You showed us a few examples with the slides, Maine Yankee, Row, Connecticut. So did those examples have sufficient funding to get the job done?
they had sufficient funding, taken into consideration that some of those closed down prematurely, and they may have to go back to the state and ask for additional funds to complete the decommissioning. I think Connecticut did that, I think maybe Maine did that too. But all 10 have been decommissioned within the decommissioning fund allocated for the decommissioning.
So did any of them have a surplus left over? And if so, what would happen to that money?
That's up to the state.
Okay.
The State Public Utility Commission authorized the collection of those funds, and some states have requirements for what happens to the funds once they're, if there are any left over, and some don't. I
So
just
some of
don't,
them
that's not something we get into, it's a state requirement.
Okay, so some of them moved forward in the process. Got towards the end, found out that the fund was insufficient, and had to go to the local state government for a kind of supplemental income
Right.
to get the job done correctly.
Right.
All right, so last question.
If I may point information on that, Mr. Mahoney, I think.
Sure.
No, because I think it gets into regulated and deregulated. So at Maine Yankee, where it was still regulated,
Right.
they could go back to the state, whereas here in Massachusetts, you're deregulated. So it's,
Right.
there is no coffer to go back to.
So it's nice to have a decommissioning fund with a X amount of dollars in it. And I think we all know that obviously if you leave the money alone and it's properly invested and looked after, that over 10 or 20 or 30 years is going to increase. So that's simple to say. But the second half of the equation is, inflation is affecting how much it costs to decommission. So where is that, how do we know that the interest earned on the account is outpacing the cost over a decade or two of whatever it's gonna cost to properly decommission? Isn't that a crap game?
Well, the regulations require that they have a overall 2% rate of return over inflation. Okay, so, as a minimum. So it's lots of money, they can invest it wisely, the trustee can, to get the rate of return. That's what I understand from our financial people. So.
All right. Thank you.
Questions? Jack? Couple of questions. So, can you explain the site characterization process that you talked about with Oak Ridge, and where in the timeline does that fall?
As you know, when the plant's operating, they're required to maintain an environmental monitoring program. That, coupled with the requirements in the NRC requirements for maintaining records that might be important to decommissioning, there's supposed to be a special file that they keep on spills, leaks, et cetera, that could impact the decommissioning. So based on that, the environmental report or the environmental monitoring program, and of course, the on-site surveys that they do, along with the, I guess I'll call them files important to decommissioning, those just start off with what we call the site historical assessment. And if you want to look this up, it's follows the multi-agency radiological investigation survey. You're familiar with MARSM, right? New Reg 1575. So the first step in the process is you would do do a site historical assessment, look at all your documentation, the operating history of the site, where did you have spills, where do you have underground pipes, have you been monitoring those areas? And that's the first thing you do is where am I going to look for look for residual activity. That's part of this first part of the phase is that historical assessment. The second part of that is a scoping survey, which you would actually go out and say, okay, I might have something here, so I'm going to survey that, plus I'm going to survey the areas around it to make sure that it's in that same area that we think it's in, okay, residual activity. So that's the scoping survey. And then based on that scoping survey, along with the nuclides and other important facts that would go into a survey, characterization survey, then you would go out and do the detailed characterization survey. That survey can be done anytime. Most plants try to do it in the beginning because, or keep tabs on the site so they can keep a reasonable lid on the cost estimate.
So is that done after the PSDAR is
It can be
submitted?
done anytime. Normally after they shut down, though.
So that information is critical to the PSDAR on estimating what could the costs
It
of
could be,
cleaning that up?
it could be. Depends on how much confidence they have in their environmental program. Back in 2012, we put out what we established regulations to prevent what we call legacy sites, sites that don't have enough money or technical know-how to clean up the sites. And specifically for reactors, there's a industry guidance, which we consider a compliance guidance, NEIO 707, which is the groundwater monitoring program set up by the industry. We consider that to be compliant with our regulations. We call that the decommissioning planning rule. It requires you to survey the areas of the plant, including the subsurfaces at the plant. Traditionally, the biggest problem with the decommissioning, in particular with the material sites, is they get groundwater contamination from a leak that they didn't know about.
Well, let's
Okay.
kind of stick to
Yeah,
Pilgrim.
but I'm just
because we
saying-
know we've had those issues
Yeah,
with Pilgrim and Tritium and,
right. But they are required to survey, to have wells and other sampling points that are adjacent to those areas to know whether they are starting to create any contamination of the subsurface, including impacting the groundwater. So there's a reasonable amount of
About the bay.
data collected that knows that they're close in for the plant. It's not going to be a massive area to be cleaned up.
so how did that?
That's
so
why I went over the Connecticut
So what happened
Yankee.
with Connecticut Yankee? But
That was well before our regulations went into effect. Okay?
So we wouldn't expect the same conditions to happen
That's true.
with Pilgrim as we would
They would
with
be
Connecticut
identified
Yankee?
now.
Before the PSDAR?
Yeah, they would be identified now. That's why all the plants have been monitoring for tritium and other things that have impacted a lot of the various operating plants. So,
Just on the tritium point, you know, I mean, all sites are not created equal, obviously, and the tritium that is found at Pilgrim is so close to Cape Cod Bay that it's not, you know, the groundwater is not a steady state. You know, it flushes with the tide. And so, you know, the question that you know, looms at me is, how are your regulations protecting this unique environment? Because you don't really act as though the site is in a moving environment. You know what I mean? It's not, you can't pump out the groundwater even if you wanted to, right? So, you know, how are you protecting the bay? It's because that tritium, those tritium counts go up and down because they're getting flushed all the time, right? The leak hasn't been found, the leak hasn't stopped. You know, it's just a question of whether it's actively leaking or whether it's not, and how high the tide is.
well, I think the question you have to ask yourself is how much tritium is really being discharged to the environment.
Do you know the
And-
answer to that?
I don't know the specifics. It's not in my realm yet to know that from Pilgrim still operating.
So, does your regulations, I think the question is, does your regulations cover this
Well,
situation?
there are requirements in Part 20 for effluent monitoring and in monitoring the environment. And so those are reported to us every year. So,
I'd like to come back to
okay.
Sorry,
that question.
Jack.
That's fine. Happy to defer some time for that important question. So, you said Connecticut Yankee, Maine Yankee, Yankee Row, and I believe Rancho Seco were the four of the plants that you listed that had a unrestricted release
Yeah, all
limit
10 of
that
them have
was
been.
less than 10 milliram?
All 10 plants that have been, power plants that have had their licenses terminated for unrestricted release have been only a few millirum of the limit. Only a small fraction, a few millirum per year. And all 70 or so on that bar chart I showed in the beginning have been released for unrestricted release.
I thought you also said that the states required them to meet that 10
States can have
milligram?
additional requirements placed on the utility or the licensee, the owner of the property, to do additional things beyond the NRC regulations. States can't require less than us, but they can require more than what we require.
So how would I require more if 10 is less than 25?
Can,
Say that one more time?
You think you might?
I think you
Oh,
may
did I
have
say it
missed
backwards?
that
Yeah,
perhaps.
okay. The state can have additional requirements placed on the decommissioning. So the states can have more restrictive requirements than the NRCs. So the state could require 10 millirim versus 25 millirim as that endpoint. Now, some states do it by regulation, some states do it by legislation. It's all in how they conduct business. So, can I clarify that?
Yes.
Okay. So, I think, I'm not sure, Connecticut had a limit of 17 millirim. I thought Massachusetts had a similar dose limit for Yankee Row.
We had 10 millirim for Yankee Row.
Did you? Okay. I'm just saying it was, I remember they had one more restrictive than,
So I just wanted to go back to sticking with Connecticut Yankee, because that would be a concern of mine, that we would underestimate any contamination that would be in the ground and not be included in the PSDAR, and then our cost estimates would not be valid. So one of the, I'll say, advantages that you talked about was allowing a plant to have deferred dismantlement, because the short-lived radionuclides would decay, and the construction team may get less exposure doing the dismantling. Connecticut Yankees experiences what they found where they had transuranics, much 1,000-year half-life radionuclides, where the short-lived gamma radionuclides decayed, and it became more difficult because the short-lived gamma is used as an indicator for
Okay.
contamination levels. So wouldn't that in fact cause cost increase, because you're trying to find more difficult to detect radionuclides than the short-lived?
let me clarify a couple things. One is Connecticut Yankee did not have a transuranic problem. What they did have was because they did chemical cleaning, they removed a lot of the gamma activity to get the dose down for the workers. And what they were depending on was the gamma component to measure the hard to detects. And what they set up was a quality assurance program where they would, one of the things that you have an HB background? Okay. What they were doing is measuring the cesium gamma and correlating that to a ratio to strontium-90, which is a pure beta emitter, right? Both have about a 30-year half-life. And so what they would do is they would take soil samples, and every 10th sample, they would verify that that ratio of gamma to beta activity was remaining constant. Okay? And so, yes, that could add to the cost, but they also had to remove a lot of dirt that then caused them to measure all that dirt that may or may not have been required to be removed, had they hadn't been able to stay with the 25 milligram limit.
I don't think we're in favor of leaving the radioactive material in the ground, and
Well, I'm just saying but if it met our criteria, that's what it meant, it would be allowed to be terminated, as long as they were practicing the Alara component.
Let me just make sure we have time, I just want to make sure we get everybody, so.
Okay, thank you, Kurt. Chief, question for you. As the Commonwealth has already enjoyed the decommissioning of Yankee Row, very similar power plant,
It's a small pressurized water reactor, yeah.
that is correct, sir? Yeah, and that's already been taken on a greenfield as you portrayed. Should Plymouth, the good people of Plymouth, expect any difference? Do you see any differences between Pilgrim Station and Yankee Row's experience?
Well, and in the fact that it's a larger plant, there obviously be more radioactive waste removed, so there'll probably be more traffic, truck traffic, not probably a tremendous amount of it, but it'd be more. I would expect that Pilgrim would be decommissioned safely, just like Yankee Row was. Yankee Row was unique in that it had some significant failed fuel, and so the measurement program became more difficult for looking for hot particles. So it really took some extensive surveys to verify.
Pilgrims had that same experience.
Well, I don't know. I assume they may have had some, but I can just say that that I would expect that they can decommission the plant safely, and that the citizens of Pilgrim should expect that to occur whenever that transpires.
I'm good.
May I come back over? What we're gonna do is take about maybe another up to 10 minutes before we turn to the public, but
Thank you. Bruce, thanks for coming down. David Nichols. I'm curious on the spent fuel storage long-term, and if that isn't the purview of the decommissioning branch, then you can defer. You know, to me, it seems kind of silly that we put these things 150 feet from the water, but I understand that that's the guidance or the regulation that the NRC has that allows that. But there's nothing that prevents the licensee from moving it further back if the guidance says no closer than 150. It doesn't say it can't be 1,500 feet from the shore, right?
Yeah, it's up to the licensee where they put it, as long as they meet the minimum requirements. A lot of them are placed based on security and protecting them. It's up to them where they want to put it. Some sites are bigger than others, some are smaller. Some have very big, big restrictions on where they could possibly put the site.
You might want to explain where you're citing that, the impact of skyshine and the site boundary. Those are some of the requirements that
Right.
are involved in where exactly geographically you can place that
Right.
pad.
So it shrinks it down based on all these other factors. too.
Yes.
And a lot has to do with the size of the site.
Right.
I mean, I'm trying to think, the Indian Point site's a pretty small site, really. So, but where I spent many years at the Calvert Cliffs, they owned 2,200 acres, so it was put up in an easily defendable area up off the bay, right?
Right.
So it's all up to the utility to decide what is the best place, secure place, and meet all the other criteria such as the dose rate requirements from the boundary and everything else, so.
And then, can you just share a little bit of the NRC philosophy on the viability of these casks in the long term? You know, there's been some talk in the press about that there might be problems with some of this dry storage in 30 years or in 40 years. I don't have any confidence we're gonna be shipping this stuff to Nevada anytime soon. You know, kind of what is the NRC philosophy of the long-term storage in these existing structures, and what happens if that needs to be changed?
I really can't speak, because spent fuel is not necessarily my expertise, but the NRC is coming up with the monitoring programs to make sure the containers stay within the required integrity requirements, since it looks like they're going to be there for longer term than the original expected time. We originally licensed them, I think, for 20 years. Many are going through the licensing renewal process. There's going to be either requirements or industry guidance that we will oversee to make sure that these casks are monitored. I know the Electric Power Research Institute has come up with a number of ways to measure the thickness of the canisters and to ensure that stainless steel retains its containment requirements for the fuel. The NRC is making adjustments because obviously the progress hasn't been made for the permanent repository. We are right now we're reviewing a application for a consolidated storage facility. There was two of them. One was in Texas, and I think the other one's in New Mexico. One was withdrawn. I think the Texas one was withdrawn. I think the New Mexico one application is still going ahead, where a company wants to take the fuel and consolidate it in one area and manage the fuel out there for profit and hopefully alleviate the number of sites around the country. But that's under review right now, so we'll see where that goes, whether they can meet our stringent safety requirements for that. And then obviously the material will have to be transported safely to those locations, that location.
Mr. Chair, that might be interesting to talk with the spent fuel guys at the NRC as well at some point down the road to get a better sense of where that's going.
I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about some of the motivations behind decommissioning versus safe store, and whether you've seen, or whether NRC even allows states to do anything to motivate companies to go to decommissioning versus safe store. I know that Yankee Row wanted to go to unrestricted end use, so they were motivated themselves to go to decommissioning. I think they were also not a merchant plant.
Right.
So there was some differences there, but I didn't know whether you've seen anything that pushes facilities to move in that direction.
I can only talk to what I've seen. The NRC really can't require anybody to do decommissioning unless we feel like they're not going to make the 60-year requirement. Excuse me. But I can tell you that the plants in the 1990s that were decommissioned, the Maine Yankees, the Connecticut Yankees, they all had the incentive that the burial site was closing in Barnwell, South Carolina. So if we didn't do it, if they didn't do it then, they would be storing that waste on site or having the site sit there until the next availability of the burial sites became available. I think with the new business model, where these sites are transferred to an entity that's going to do the decommissioning, I think it's one way the utility or the licensee gets this liability off the balance sheet. If you clean up the site and it's available for reuse, then that becomes an asset. So I think there's certain business decisions that are made. I think Zion's that way. They had this site sitting there for 15 years in Safe Store and got approached by a private company to get the decommissioning done for a price of X amount. I forget, 800 million or whatever it is, and 600 million or whatever it was. And so they said, oh, you can do it for that, and we'll transfer the license to you to do that. And when you're done, and the license is terminated, we will retain ownership of the property and, of course, continue to manage the spent fuel. So, I mean, it's all about the business, the ability to make money, I would assume, or the business decision to eliminate liabilities for the company. So these are all business decisions. Even, like I said, the shutdown or keep operating are business decisions. If it's a safety issue, then we will get involved in it. But the plants are operating safely, and so it's really up to the owner, the licensee, the utility to decide what they're going to do with their property.
So the other half of my question there is, I understand that states can push for lower cleanup standards ultimately. Can states push for the decision to decommission versus safe store?
I would think that that's a possibility. But as I said before, the regulations are under the federal jurisdiction, so they're not something that the state can override. So I don't know. Maine was in the process of putting legislation together, and the power company decided, you don't need to legislate this, we're just going to go do it. Of course, they were under the state regulatory control, still under the regulatory umbrella of the Public Service Commission.
Thanks.
We have time for one last question before we open up. Oh, two last questions.
Thank you, thank you. I understand, or we understand, that the NRC is going through rule changes that will come into effect in the fall of 2019. Can you tell us if you've already started that, how we can participate in it, and potentially have Pilgrim come under the new rules?
The decommissioning rulemaking is in progress. We're under a strict schedule from the commission to get this done. I think the goal is, like you said, fall of 2019. It's takes into account all the lessons we've learned from the shutdowns at San Onofre, Vermont, Kewanee, and Crystal River, all the plants that shut down recently, that prematurely shut down. Pilgrim shutting down in 2019. It may or may not be, the rulemaking may or may not be done completely, or at a point where some of the things that the utility could take advantage of in not having to submit as many license amendment or exemptions. It's really up to the timing when it actually gets published, and when their needs are to try and reduce the amount of requirements on them when they enter decommissioning. So it's, I know they're watching it closely because I know they don't want to expend any more energy on it than they need to.
Is there I don't either. Is there a list online, you know, on your website that tells us what kinds of rules that you're considering and changing? So that we, you know, we're in a position here where we're talking about all this stuff, so
Yeah.
obviously would like to participate, but not to in a way that does not do us
Yeah,
any advantage.
There's been 2 public comment periods on it so far. We're in the process of producing what's called the regulatory basis analysis, I guess it is. And so that'll be coming out soon. I think you can go to regulations.gov and look at for the NRC information on this. I believe most of this is also publicly available in Adams. So it's basically called the decommissioning rulemaking,
Thank you.
okay?
You mentioned that one of the factors determining the location, size of the ISFSI is security. I notice, or I am aware that Vermont Yankee, there is I thought, a licensee application to shrink the size eventually of the protected area to around the ISFSI.
Yeah, what they're gonna do is they're gonna shrink what we would call you have security areas. You have areas outside the plant, you still own the property, so you wanna maintain certain level of security so people aren't out there or whatever. Then you have another set of security requirements, say at the fence line. And if the plant's operating, that's where your line of demarcation is. Okay, but within that area, there's also areas called vital areas, where you don't want any, I'll say mischief in this case, okay? So what they're doing is, since the fuel's no longer in the spent fuel pool, which is the only vital area left, the new license has security requirements on it. So you no longer need the vital area requirements inside the plant, because the fuel's no longer there. So that security, all those extra security requirements go with the fuel, okay?
So the question I have is, going through the slides, you showed a number of ISFSIs of plants that had been decommissioned. And from what I could determine, the only security was a double fence around the IFSI.
Well, there's a lot there, and I can't talk about it, but,
I understand, but is there some point at which in the denigration of the fuel or whatever in the CAS, that security is no longer required?
no. The security will go on until the fuel's removed. There are guards there for 24/7. Can't go into all the details, but they're there 24/7. They have their own facility to monitor the fuel and the perimeters and stuff around, so.
So, last question, Kurt, promise. So the ISFSI for Pilgrim right now is right in the back of the plant, and it's within the protected area.
Right.
So if a second pad is going to be constructed, there is kind of limited space there. And if somehow some of us might get involved in that second pad determination, and it moves up, what about the licensee has already expended a certain amount of money to put the pad down by the plant? If they had to, I mean, would you have 2 ISFSIs, or would you have to consolidate into one, or is there a requirement to do that?
Interesting question. No one's ever done that, had 2. They've always consolidated them in one area.
Okay.
So they have one security
Right.
force and one security plan that goes for the same one, because it's economically better.
Thank you very much.
So,
So, it's time to open for public comment questions. I'm going to start the same way, Sean, which is raise your hand if at this point you have a question or comment. I just want to see how much interest there is. So, 4 people. So, what I'm going to do, which is slightly different than Sean, because sometimes we have people that ask questions, and sometimes we have people that want to make comments. If you have a question, what I'm going to do, how many people have a question to ask? You have 2. So I'm going to ask Mary and both come up. I want you to ask your questions. We're going to take both questions, sit down, and then we're going to answer. But we're going to take a couple questions. They may be related. So, yeah, so I'll take the first 3 people that have questions. I'm going to ask you to ask the questions. We're going to take the questions from 3 people first, and then we'll answer and then move on. We'll keep going. It's not the only, but first 3 people. So again, so just. That's fine. So I want to get the questions out of the way first. So let's take your question.
The initial question, you talked at great length about various information that's provided to you by the licensee, some of which goes back to long before Entergy in this particular plant even owned the plant. To what extent does the NRC independently verify the critical information that it gets?
Thank you. So you understand the question. We'll come back. So
I might want to define what critical information is. I mean, financial,
Where do you want to begin? You have information about the condition of the site. You have information about what radiation may be on the site. You have information concerning what happened when Pilgrim blew its filters back in the '80s, and there were literally people with hazmat suits wandering around Plymouth, seeing what had happened. All kinds of site information. All kinds of just what is there. All of the financial information, all of the progress information, all of the verifications that really the work has been done within the estimate, because if it isn't, how in heaven's name do you know if they're going to complete it? Start where you will.
okay?
second row. Oh, now you're throwing it.
Okay.
Get up.
Okay, yeah. Hi, I'm Diane Turco with Cape Town Windows. I just was wondering, when you were talking about Rancho Seco and it was turned to a greenfield, I'm sorry, when you were talking about Rancho Seco.
Yeah, it's not a greenfield.
Okay, it's not a greenfield, but
It's just
you-
industrial.
Okay,
buildings.
but it could be used?
Yes.
It's open. Okay, is that just the area where the building was? Because when Pilgrim is decommissioned, is the area you're talking about that would be unrestricted is right where the reactor building is, not outside the,
It'll be everything but where the dry fuel storage is.
okay, all right. So would you also recommend too that a school could be built there?
Yeah, it's what the owner decides to do with the property.
Okay, but you mentioned at Rancho Seco, a school could be built there. Would you think that could happen here at Pilgrim?
It's really up to the owner.
Okay.
It's not, I mean,
I think the question is, does unrestricted truly mean unrestricted?
Yes,
Meaning anything?
but I'm just concerned that we have somebody here who's supposed to be looking for public safety, would consider that a school could be built, could be
it's
built
whatever
next
the
to a
owner
nuclear
decides is
waste
the
dump
right
site.
thing to do, and that consistent with whatever the local community and the state wants to permit it for or whatever. I
Okay,
mean,
so
it's.
the NRC would have no problem with
Hold on.
that, okay.
Do you have a second question?
Okay, yes, I do,
No, the
but
first one,
I
okay.
just am concerned
Second
about a school
question.
next to a dump,
Right.
waste dump. Also, you said that after the PSDR is submitted, there'd be a public meeting, okay? I'm just wondering, what impact would public input have on decision-making? You know, like Pine was talking about the pad being too close to the ocean. We have concerns about the dry casts that are being used there. What action would be taken on any public input?
So let's,
Okay.
Okay.
We're gonna come back, so I think
Okay.
that we understand the question. I'm gonna, there was one more, don't worry, I'm gonna get to you, Mary. Let's add one more question, then we'll do another round, so.
Richard Rothstein, Town of Plymouth. Bruce, what do you feel is the most contentious issue to be addressed as NRC revises its existing decommissioning regulations based on the framework that came out about a year and a half ago when NRC was looking for comment, and then the public meeting that took place earlier this spring? What do you think is the thorniest issue or issues that are going to have to be addressed?
Thanks, so why don't we, it's current, so let's
Okay.
answer this question, then we'll go back to the other three.
Okay.
And then we're gonna get more questions, Mary, after, we'll just answer these, and then we'll add more, so.
I'm not looking at, my organization is looking at what we call Appendix H, which is the current decommissioning regulations. And, but there's about, I want to say 15 or 17 areas that are being evaluated. I would say, in my opinion, now this is my opinion, I can't speak on behalf of the commission. In the decommissioning area, I think a lot of people don't like the 60-year requirement, that you complete decommissioning within 60 years. A lot of people think it should be done right away, and there's other people that believe that 60 years is just fine. So that's, but, you know, the bottom line is, we look at things from a safety perspective in evaluating that. The other area I would like to probably see, and I don't know what they're doing in that area, but they're evaluating some of the financial information that's required. And I don't know where they're headed on that, but it's still going through the analysis part. But those are the two areas, I'll say two areas rather than just one for you, that I think are important that we do a proper total evaluation on.
Kurt, while I'm up here, if I could just clarify something from a moment ago.
As long as you can do it in 30 seconds, otherwise.
I can
it's
do
not
it in
fair to the
15
process.
seconds.
15 seconds, you got it.
Back in spring 2015, NRC had its annual report card meeting about Pilgrim, and there was a discussion about the flood hazard reevaluation report. Questions came up from the audience, public, and NRC concluded that if they found issues with regard to the current location of the dry cast storage pad there, they could require Entergy to modify some things or move it, just for the record. Thank you.
Okay?
So if I can then go back to the questions, one question was, how does public input at the public hearing, how is that taken into account by the NRC and potentially impact how the NRC reviews the PSDAR?
Okay. We expect comments from the public on the PSDAR. What we're looking for, is there a safety issue that we are not aware of or should take into consideration from the PSDAR report? I can tell you it's also for the licensee to hear the public's concerns. And I know at Connecticut Yankee, one of the issues was, if you're familiar with Connecticut Yankee, it's kind of down on the river, and you have to drive through a number of, I guess I'll call them housing developments that are not nearly a housing development, but a lot of local traffic with a lot of curves and bends in the highways. And so the local citizens were concerned about the amount of increase in traffic and, of course, truck traffic on the community. So what the utility did was they hired the local sheriff to spend a lot of time on those roads, and he handed out a lot of tickets until everyone slowed down and kept the traffic safety at its best, I guess I'll call it. So those are the kind of things that we hear. We're looking for, you know, safety issues that we can take into consideration. But like I said, the regulations are performance-based. It's really up to the licensee to make a lot of decisions. So those are the type of comments we're looking for. But like I said, they're also for the utility to take into account.
Another question, I think, was, when the NRC releases a site for unrestricted use, from the NRC standpoint, does unrestricted mean unrestricted?
And
In
it,
other words,
yep,
can a school
right.
be built?
Yeah, we have no say in what the land is reused for. It's all up to the owner and what the state or the local community have permitted it for. You have to take into consideration that it has been an industrial site, which had a nuclear power plant on it, or other power plants on it in a lot of cases. So it's gonna be zoned industrial, or whatever the local community or jurisdiction decides to change the planning or zoning on. So like I said, from our perspective, it can be used for anything. The question about radiation, people are gonna get 300 to 600 millirem per year just by being on the planet. If it's a couple millirem that may be added to that from the decommissioning residual, then it's no difference than me flying back to California or someplace else in the near future. So, but, you know, it's up to the local jurisdiction to make those decisions along with the state and the owner, critically the owner. So, from our perspective, it's safe.
And I think the first question was, how, to what extent does the NRC scrutinize, evaluate, verify the information, critical information that it receives from the owner?
Well, the licensees are required to submit us a number of reports. But I think the most critical thing to us is the fact that we have resident inspectors that are there, as you say, boots on the ground, verifying that what's going on at the plant is really what's happening. So when the plant's operating, we have 2 to 3 resident inspectors, depends on how many units are there. And so they're there to verify that the licensee is conducting the operations consistent with the license requirements and the regulations and all the other requirements imposed on them to make sure the plant stays safe. So, I mean, that to me is the critical element in all of this, and that's why we have the resident inspector program. Those residents are supplemented by a variety of experts, whether they're health physicists or security people, emergency response people, specific engineering issues that come up. Not only is the licensee required to maintain our requirements, many of them are required to comply with certain material code requirements, ASME, ANSI standards for the equipment and the piping and other things, and they're required to inspect those and monitor them and test those things from different periodic times during the operating life of the plant. And like I said, we have inspectors that verify that the measurements and stuff that are done on these components and other safety systems that are tested periodically in accordance with the technical specifications to ensure the plant is maintained safely. So I think that's the critical thing. We have the resident inspectors are looking at the radiological program, and we also have people that are looking at the financial health of the utility from time to time. So, like I said, I think the regulatory program is pretty. The oversight of the site is the regulatory program is comprehensive. It's looked at in great detail and depth from time to time, various aspects of it. And of course, like I said, the critical part to me is that we have resident inspectors there that are there to see that things are done on a day-to-day basis correctly.
Mary, if you have a question, we're gonna. Question, does anybody else have a question? Then we'll take your question, we'll answer, and then if there's some comments, and then we will be wrapped up by 8:30.
Yeah, I'd like you to explain a discrepancy. The nuclear waste confidence decision stated that fuel could stay safely in either the pool or cask for 60 years. After 100 years, you'd have to change the cask and the pad and then move forward. However, the NRC has also stated that you cannot, you could expect perhaps a crack within 30 years. Dr. Singe, CEO of Holtec, and we have Holtec CAS, has stated publicly on numerous occasions that you cannot, and NRC has said, inspect the canisters, because you can't see through the concrete. And Dr. Singe says if there is a crack, you cannot use welding, because then you are encouraging more stress corrosion, and you cannot repair them. He has talked about the fact that putting it in the pool is a dangerous concept, plus the pool is not going to be there. It's going to be taken down. Hot cell technology has not been completed. I understand that the NRC had asked licensees to come up with an inspection program in 5 years, and then to inspect one canister every 25 years, and then every 1 year after. So there's a disconnect, a big disconnect. So I'd like you to put those disparities together, number one, and number two, explain how in PSDARs in Vermont, for example, they assume in doing their economic calculations that the spent fuel will leave, I believe it's in the 40s. Where did that come from? And how can the NRC, or how has the NRC approved that? On what basis? Please tell us the good news when it is all going to go off-site, so that can be a valid assumption in figuring out costs. Thank you very much.
I'll respond to that, probably not in a way that's going to make you happy. I do agree that, I forget who made the suggestion, that we have our spent fuel people come in and really get into those details, because I'm not the expert on it.
That'd be great.
Yeah, okay. But I do know we have programs that are underway with the Electric Power Research Institute to conduct some testing of these casks. I think they've been done at a couple sites. I think Calvert Cliffs was the first one, on ways to monitor the casks. I can't speak to the specifics on that, but they are working on it, and that's an extensive research program that's going on at the NRC. Trying to think of what else. The dates quoted in the PSDR for the transfer of the fuel are based on what the Department of Energy is advertising as the dates they expect to be able to take title to the fuel. So, well, I mean, I don't know. It's their call. It's when they were projecting that they would have a repository available, I would believe. I can only speculate on why they have those dates, but there are DOE dates that the licensees can put in there. It's the only reasonable assumption they can make in saying when they might think that the fuel will be removed. So you base your assumptions on what you know or expect to know. So anyway, it's their date, not ours. We would like to see that obviously sooner. We hope that the interim storage becomes a viable possibility to transfer the fuel, but it's not up to the NRC. It's up to your policymakers in Washington to get this issue resolved. So I'll leave it at that. It's well beyond our control. So
comments rather than questions. One, Diane, two, three. So given the time, comments need to be brief comments. If we do a minute and a half for the three of you, but we'll end up wrapping up right at 8:30. So brief comments. I saw 3 hands. So.
And I think you've given me 90 seconds, and I guess that should be plenty. One of the things I'm walking away here with tonight is perhaps a better understanding than I had of how narrowly compartmentalized the NRC is a very large institution, and how big a job this panel is going to have if it hopes to gain information from the people that really have information on the specific subjects that you're listening to, because it's unfortunately fairly clear, and I'm not blaming Mr. Watson, that there are an awful lot of things that are centrally involved to this panel's work that are simply beyond the purview of anything he really deals with. Second, with respect to the financials, and it kind of illustrates that there are areas where I don't think the right hand of the NRC knows what some other hand is doing. He talked about 2% projected increase required in the investments. Other NRC papers have talked about 5 to 9% annual increase in costs. They don't really quite match up. Industry panels have come up with, said that the increase in cost over, I believe it was a 5-year period, were 60%. I will get to this panel the information that I've managed to collect over the past 2 or 3 years related to this cost, because believe me, getting it out of the left hand, the right hand, or what other hand you have of the NRC or anywhere else is an extraordinarily difficult task.
I'll go Diane, and then Mary, you'll have the last word. So.
Thank you. I'm glad that you said that you listened to your resident inspectors, because their February 14th report of this year said that nuclear safety is not a overriding priority at Pilgrim, and that's a quote. I think the NRC needs to stop dancing around the danger about the spent fuel and the dry cask storage. There's been studies done by local people regarding the dangers there. And if we end up having to pay, like Vermont and Connecticut did, for decommissioning, because we know that there's not enough money in the decommissioning fund, then if we have to pay, we should have a say, and that's what's going to happen. This committee, I have to applaud all of you folks for coming here and doing this work, but you really need to have teeth, and the NRC needs to listen and do something, okay? You don't listen to the public. It's always been a dog and pony show. We are demanding that you listen now. This is a public safety situation, not a business decision. And you are government. You need to stand up for public safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Mary.
Yes, you'll get a Lampert report on economics, but I do want to make a point that up in Vermont, I watch by video the meetings of the NRC. NRC stated at the public meeting that, have no fear, we assure that if Entergy does not have the money, then we will assure that you'll get it, and we'll go to the home company. Now, how you can't justify that. They're a limited liability company. That was the whole point. And if you look at the DPU agreement that was made in the sale of from Boston Edison to Entergy, the Attorney General's office wanted to assure you could go back to Entergy in Louisiana. And DPU, God knows why, objected to that. And it was stated right then and there that, no, you can't go back to the home company. So if NRC, this is an interesting thought, has approved all along and said there's enough money, and there isn't enough money, I should think the agency should be liable. Interesting thought.
Thank you. So it's 8:26. Final comments? Yes?
No, Kurt, just request for the next meeting, an agenda item. Chairman Tavares asked me to get a little input from this group with respect to a topic that came up a couple of times tonight, and that was, Bruce has said that a state can say that they want a lower millirem requirement for the closure than the NRC allows, and we've had a citizen request that the board send a letter into the Secretary of Health and Human Resources saying this because the Commonwealth really doesn't have too many standards, and Chairman Tavares wants this He wants me to get some input from this group prior to the Board of Selectmen discussing that, so if we could put that on as an agenda item, I'd appreciate it.
Sean and I will discuss, I certainly understand the issue, we'll connect with Jack to see if we can talk about, at least talk about under state statute, state regulation, what are the options in this state for looking at, and how would we look at, and what's the process? That's, some of those discussions I know are already taking place, so we'll see if we can't add that. And I know that Sean has also talked with Entergy about, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, about taking some time at the next meeting to talk, for Energy to talk about some of the, its plans, issues, how it's approaching some of these issues. So, but Sean and I will finalize the agenda. So, and any other suggestions,
Kurt and
feel free to
John,
email.
The site restoration sub-panel and cleanup meets next week for our first meeting on October 25th, and I think that will be
It's a great forum.
central topic to kind of put together how we want to present that, and then communicate that back up through the panel, and then make a recommendation for how we should communicate that at this level.
So Sean and I will talk, one option might be to ask the subcommittee to do just a report out of its discussions. We'll figure that out, so.
Okay, thank you.
Final thoughts, comments? As I'm looking at 8:29, Sean would be proud of me. Don't take me to 8:31 or Sean will fire me, so. Hearing none, thank you. Meeting is adjourned.